So, guys, good evening. Thank you very much, Robert, for being with me again. We again and on air with Robert W. Sullivan IV, antiquarian, Freemason, researcher of the occult, and author of the book Cinema Symbolism 1, 2, 3, and 4.
4 soon.
Which is on the work. Soon, yeah, that's what I mean. So we agreed to shine a little bit light on the topic of the Rosicrucianism and occult codes in Shakespeare works, and who might be the real author of the Shakespearean sonnets, and why does it matter? Not only within the academic society, because obviously the academicians would like to theoretically establish the true authorship of the Shakespearean works, but it's also has a bearing on the research of the occult and let's say the influence of the Francis Bacon and the other Rosicrucians of the 17th or late 15th century on our world today. So that's why we would like to elaborate on this topic. I made a presentation in Moscow about the possible authorship of Francis Bacon, which we've been rumored for centuries, by the way. But I presented the cryptographic evidence, and I would like you to share your views on this issue as well, because you might have encountered things which I overlooked in the works of Shakespeare and Francis Bacon as well. So, please, Robert.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Dean, for having me back on. It's my pleasure to be here. I think this is the third time that I've been on. Yeah, I mean, Shakespeare and the occult and Francis Bacon. I mean, this certainly ties into a lot of what I write about and what I talk about. Certainly with Shakespeare, I mean, you were definitely dealing with like sort of the pop culture war only, in Elizabethan times in Jacobean England. There's a lot going on, and not all the plays, but in a lot of the Shakespeare plays, I mean, there is definitely an encoding of the occult, mysticism, real life people being placed in the plays under other names. I guess probably the most obvious is John Dee, is of course Prospero in The Tempest. That's the most obvious one. The Rosicrucian prototype philosopher Giordano Bruno turns up in Love's Labour's Lost as Barone. I believe there's a part in that where he actually quotes Bruno's work, The Expulsion of the Triumphal Beast. I'd have to go look that up. But Barone in Love Labour's Lost is clearly Giordano Bruno. If you remember in that play, Bruno chases after the dark-skinned Rosaline, and that is she's dark-skinned. That comes from the world of Albrecht Dürer. It has to do with the planet Saturn, where he said Saturn, the Saturnian has dark skin, and of course this was what Bruno was into. Any student of the occult was considered a Saturnian back then, a melancholic. This comes out of the world of Marcello Ficino and
Robert, hold on a second. Robert, hold on a second. You've been lost for about a minute. Can you please repeat it, because the signal went out?
Okay. It's funny. I'll start over. It's funny. You can edit it out. It's funny because a lot of times when I do these shows, I can't tell you how many times the signal drops, and it just makes you wonder, if there's someone playing around or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it happens more than once. It's surprising. No, what I'll start the whole thing over. What I was saying was, in the Shakespeare plays, you definitely have an encoding of the mysticism, the occult. This is well documented now in 2022. Some of this is obviously, more clear cut than others. For example, as I was saying, John Dee, Queen Elizabeth's court astrologer, turns up as Prince Prospero in The Tempest. The philosopher, the mystic Giordano Bruno, who is a proto-Rosicrucian thinker, he turns up in Love's Labour's Lost as Barone. And as I was saying, I believe there's part of that. I believe in part of the play, Barone actually quotes Bruno's part of Expulsion of the Triumphal Beast. I'd have to go look that up, but I'm pretty sure he does. And what I was saying was, if you recall that play, Bruno was chasing after a dark-skinned woman. Her name is Rosaline. And the idea of dark skin comes from Albrecht Dürer, who was a mystical engraver, and he presented the Saturnian thinker, the Saturnian melancholic, as dark-skinned, and this was something that Bruno is often considered a deep philosopher, a Saturnian, a melancholic. This comes out of the world of Pico della Mandarola, Marsilio Ficino, and this turns up in the Elizabethan court as sort of a cult of chastity that you find pervasive in the Elizabethan court. So we have Bruno and Dee right then and there in two of Shakespeare's plays. We have in Romeo and Juliet, we have the Patsy and the Medici family turning up as the Capulets and the Montagues. Of course, we have plays that are just outright occult. We have, Macbeth, where he sees the ghost. Hamlet, with Gnosticism, the false reality created by the demiurgic Uncle Claudius. We have the one with Midsummer Night, with all the fairies and goblins and things like that. I think perhaps the most interesting of the Shakespeare ones, and this is clearly written in a reaction to Christopher Marlowe, who is another very famous English playwright. Marlowe's plays are very anti-Elizabethan. You have Faustus, which is an attack on John Dee. I can get into more of the Marlowe stuff in a minute. The Marlowe plays are an attack on the Elizabethan court. You have, like I said, Faustus, which is an attack on John Dee. You have Tamburlaine, which is an attack on Queen Elizabeth herself. And then you have the Jew of Malta, which is an attack on Rodrigo Lopez, who is a Portuguese Marano, who was Queen Elizabeth's physician. In response to this, Shakespeare comes out with the Merchant of Venice, which is essentially a fusion of Hebrew Kabbalah, spelled with the letter K, with Christian Kabbalah, spelled with the letter C. The Merchant of Venice is a complete reaction to Marlowe's The Jew of Malta. And in it, if you recall, and this is very cleverly concealed, the Christian princess, Portia, has the three suitors. And the three suitors are symbolic of each of the Abrahamic faiths. You have the Prince of Aragon, who is Christianity. You have the Prince of Morocco, who is Islam. And then you have Bassanio, who is Judaism. This is where Shakespeare kind of gives himself away, tips the cards a little bit, and lets you know he's really Sir Francis Bacon. Is the selection of the lead-lined coffin or casket is what makes Bassanio, the Jew, the suitor to the Christian. It's a fusion of Christian Kabbalah and Hebrew Kabbalah. What's the significance of lead? Lead is the metal of the planet Saturn. And if you're familiar with, you have to be really, really well versed in Jewish occultism. Saturn rules the Jewish people. Why? In Hebrew Kabbalah, Moses, the Jewish lawgiver, after he expires, ascends to a Hebrew sephirah known as Bana, Bhnah. And Bana associates with black and the planet Saturn. And of course, this is why to this day you see Jews wearing the black yarmulke. Their day of the holy day is the day of Saturn, or Saturday. So the selection of the lead-lined coffin, lead of course is the metal of Saturn, identifies him as the Hebrew, and it's him winning Portia, the Christian. It's a fusion of Hebrew Kabbalah and Jewish Kabbalah. Why is that significant? Because in Marlowe's, this is again a complete counter to Marlowe's Faustus. If you recall in that, when Marlowe summons Mephistopheles, he appears hideous. He appears just like a demon, and Faustus says to him, "Go away." He says, "Come back when you're more cloaked in a guise that I can appreciate." He says, "Come back dressed as a Franciscan friar." That is a reference to a real person. That is a reference to a man named Francisco Giorgio, or Georgi, depending on how you want to pronounce it. And he was a very, very early Christian Kabbalist who fused Hebrew Kabbalah with Christian Kabbalah. And of course, this is what John Dee was into. So by Marlowe placing Francisco Giorgi, who is a Franciscan friar, as the devil, he's basically saying Kabbalah is evil, John Dee was evil, Giordano Bruno was evil, the Rosicrucians were evil. But of course, this is countered in the Merchant of Venice by Shakespeare, Francis Bacon, where it's presented as divine, holy, and it's completely in accord with Christianity. So that's a very, very, very tricky one. And I agree with you. I mean, when you're looking at Shakespeare, I mean, you're dealing with a lot of mysticism, a lot of the occult. Bacon clearly was, is clearly the likely candidate of this. He probably had help from other people who names we don't know. But you can even look at Shakespeare in the actual presentation of the plays. You're dealing with, when you're looking at Shakespeare, this is the formation, really 500 years before Carl Jung came along, of the archetypes. In each one of the plays, you have, the melancholic, the hero, the princess, the ogre father, Claudius, Hamlet. These are our archetypes. And of course, if you read the occult philosophers at the time during the Elizabethan era, people like, Ficino, Giordano Bruno, John Dee, they don't use the word archetype because that word wasn't available to them. They didn't have the advent of modern psychiatry. You'll hear the words and the phrase being kicked around as you'll constantly hear, these are images or, shadows from the world's soul. Part of the universe's soul are the archetypes. And of course, being part of the world's soul, where were the Shakespeare plays put on? The Globe Theater, because it's the world archetypes. So, this is where I kind of am with Shakespeare. It's an ongoing research for me. It's one of the most interesting topics, I think. I'd love to hear about more of what you found out about it. I think you and I would agree that Francis Bacon is likely, the mastermind behind this stuff. And, that's sort of where I am with Shakespeare.
I agree with you totally, but I think if Francis Bacon was involved in it, he wasn't the only one of the team which was involved in this. He had the team of the brilliant literary workers around him, which was called Knights of the Helmet.
Yes,
and probably that explains why body of work of Shakespeare involves lots of terms which would be known only to the seaman, only to the lawyer. Okay, Francis Bacon was the lawyer; he was the royal barrister. That fits fine, but he wasn't a seaman, so he probably could study this for one of his plays. But I rather think that it was someone else who helped him with the right terms, right type of commands which should be issued on a deck of the ship in the case of some kind of emergency situation and like that. And of course, Francis Bacon and his brother Anthony were well traveled, so they stayed within the French court, Spanish court, of course Venice, and many other Italian states. So I believe they also went to Denmark, though there's no documented material about the visit of Denmark. So we know that Prince of Hamlet is of course placed in a Danish court. But I think it's plausible that they went there as well. But it's hard to think that even the man of the magnitude of knowledge, such as Francis Bacon, would embrace so much material languages and professional skills and terms which were put into the sonnets and the plays. So I think it was rather the entire team working along. So I believe definitely Anthony Bacon, the brother, was working with Sir Francis, because you just mentioned the Biron, Longueville, and what was and Dumaine, three guys. This is the three court officials at the Elizabethan court which assigned the passport of Anthony Bacon, which somehow appeared to be in Love Labor's Lost. So with a slight alteration of the name, I think Biron was spelled like on Anthony Bacon's passport, which is displayed right now in the British Museum, something like BEROWNE, and in the Love Labor's Lost, there was no E on the end, but it's a minor details, and so it was Dumaine. So I believe it's impossible for the coincidence for the Shakespeare, whoever Shakespeare was, to put the three guys on a play together unless he didn't know these guys existed for real, on the signed passport of Anthony Bacon, which was signed, I believe, in 1587. So it is to me a very strong argument that both brothers put their hands at least on the law of labor's laws. Also, since you mentioned Marlowe, which was also one of the candidates along with the Shakespearean scholars, those who don't subscribe to the official theory about the Shakespeare authorship, they said that Christopher Marlowe is a likely candidate, but he died too young, right? So he died before the first folio was published. So it was minus 20 works of Shakespeare. So he couldn't have written at least 20 works. Maybe he'd written some, theoretically, but he couldn't have written all of them. And when the second folio came out, it was 1632, he was already dead. Over 40 years. Yeah, 40 years. And beside it was rumored that he was a homosexual. So is Bacon. There were rumors as well about this, but I think the masculinity and like a normal heterosexual masculinity permeates through the sonnets. Not all of them, but at least through the plays. So I believe if Francis Bacon was a queer himself, concealed one, it's possible that he wrote just a part of this plays, and the rest were written by the guys of his team with total different sexual orientation. But it's just a minor detail because it cannot be conclusive.
I agree. The thing that Marlowe's plays run contradictory to Shakespeare's. Shakespeare's are always written as a reaction to Marlowe's. Marlowe is very anti-Elizabethan. Many historians have concluded, mainstream ones, that whether he was a paid agent of the Jesuits, he certainly is doing their bidding for them. All his plays are counter-Reformation themes, anti-Hermeticism, anti-Elizabethan, anti-Kabbalah. Any sort of mysticism, is Satanism. So the plays of Shakespeare kind of counter the plays of Marlowe. Marlowe, like you said, he dies very young. There's a lot of conspiracy about this. Many people have alleged that, the people who were behind his death was people like Bacon and John Dee. That John Dee saw Faustus and was like, to hell with this. Someone put a bullet through this guy's head. And Marlowe, I think, was like only 27. I believe it's 1593, 4 or something. He dies. I think he was murdered suspiciously in a barroom fight, I want to say.
That's one of the versions. One of the versions was alleging this.
Yeah. And it's always been, I've always heard that, that basically like a contract, the hit was put out by people like Dee or, Edmund Spencer that realized, hey, we can't have this guy, these guys' plays being put on, he's harming the English court, someone, he was done in by Elizabethan agents. I agree with you also, and you probably have heard this in your studies or, or in your travels, was with Bacon and the group that he was with, the Knights of the Helmet. The helmet refers to Minerva. And she is the god of invisibility, the goddess of invisibility. That's why it's cloaked. That's why
cloak of invisibility. Yeah, that's right.
And of course, and this is of course where the name comes from. She carries the spear, and has the spear attacking ignorance. She's the spear shaker. Hence, Shakespeare is where the name comes from.
And this is not the only Shakespeare which was attributed to Francis Bacon, because he received a special title from James I. He was made a Baron of Verulam, or Francis of Verulamium, right? So Verulamium was the old Roman settlement in England. But if you break the word Verulam, you get Verulam, which means the shaking the spear, because Veru Vera means a short javelin or short lance, right? And
Right.
a lamb is shaking. So basically, I believe he didn't even receive his title for nothing, because probably James I was in the conspiracy himself, because he probably wouldn't have created it just for nothing. So there are lots of arguments that there was a pretty vast conspiracy of the highest aristocracy, which couldn't reveal themselves in those times, because if you remember, the last witches were still executed and burned at stake, I believe, up to 1647 in England. So for the guys of the stature of Lord Chancellor Bacon, or of course for the king was probably exempt, but we know that some kings lost their heads as well. So they wouldn't have risked with everything doing blasphemous things under their own name. So of course these disguise the names, but I think the highest argument, a cryptographic one. So you know that Manly Hall in his secret teaching of all ages alleged that Francis Bacon redacted or edited a Bible of King James, which came out in 1611, right? So it was alleged by Manly Hall. I don't know where he got his information, but he never states his sources. He says that the Bible was in the possession of either Bacon himself or the entire Knights of Helmet for almost 1 year, or even over 1 year. So if you open the facsimile edition, so complete copy of the original 1611 edition, which you can acquire now for like $1,000, you see that the most famous Psalm number 46, which is a central. It's basically central because it's 666 position from above the Bible, from above all the Psalms, and from the end. And if you take the Psalm 46 itself by itself on 46 position from above, you see shake, and you go down 111 words. And you get spear, and this spear is 40 on a 46 position from below. So basically, 46 words, counting from the beginning of the Psalm 46. You see the shake, then spear. You go down 111 words. There's only one non-biblical, non-scriptural word, which is called Selah, which you can actually leave out, because otherwise you will end up with 112 words. But so it's 111, and so it's 40 on the 46 position from below. So I believe it's too much of the coincidence to be so numbered. So 666 on both sides, and of course Shakespeare on both sides. And beside, there was on a decoration to the Bible on the front, on one of the front pages. You see the two rabbits looking back to back on the other side of, let's say, on a different side of the pages. So in those times, the rabbits were called conies. So basically, you get two back-to-back conies. So which is also kind of an allusion to the Francis Bacon. And so you see the Francis Bacon in the ornament decoration around the first letter B, which starts the play Tempest. So there are lots of indications that Bacon actually was at least partially personally involved in the creation of works of Shakespeare. And I think one of the last very serious arguments is it's in his book Resuscitatio, which came out in 1672, or long after his death. He quoted his father, Sir Nicholas Bacon, which was a judge, right? So he quotes the history, the story which was told by his father to Francis, about the certain peasant named Hogg, which probably stole something or misbehaved somehow. So he was brought up against the court. The judge Sir Nicholas Bacon, and he said, Your Honor, we are one of the kind. You are Bacon, I am the hawk, right?
Right.
and he said, he quotes his father's joke. No, the bacon is the hawk is not the bacon until it's well hanged, because this guy was about to be hanged. So
Right.
how it could be coincidence?
No.
He quotes the story in the I think in the Windsor's, in the Merry Wives of Windsor's.
Well, Merry Wives of Windsor's. The one also is, I mean, like, it's in The Winter's Tale. That's a retelling of the Eleusinian mysteries, the dying and resurrected, solar woman, Perdita, which is, Persephone, and deals with Hades. You'll find that, that going on in that. And of course, with Bacon, I mean, and this is also well known, and I'm sure you're aware of this, is of course in the New Atlantis, where you get, with the ambassador from Solomon House is the Rosicrucian, wears the white turban with the red cross. So, yeah, Bacon definitely drops hints all over the place, with this stuff. And I mean, I agree with you. I mean, in my opinion, it has to be almost Sir Francis Bacon, because I mean, if it's not him, then who else could it have been? I mean, I don't buy this argument that it's some actor, with this, at the time, I'm not putting down actors, but at the time, this person would have been, uneducated by today's standards. I mean, this person wouldn't have been well read. I mean, probably, never went to university or anything like that. I mean, when you're dealing with the works of Shakespeare, I mean, you're dealing with history, mythology, Egyptian mythology, Greco-Roman mythology, the occult, witches, goblins, fairies. You would have had, you would have had to have access to books that, could have explained this. I mean, and, you have John Dee's library right there, that Bacon could have accessed. To me, he's like the only likely candidate. But I do agree with you that it probably wasn't Bacon on his own. I'm sure he had help. I mean, I think for one person it would have been too much. But I do believe that, like you said, Bacon, the Orders of the Knights of the Helmet, this is clearly the force that is putting the works of, quote unquote, Shakespeare together.
Yeah, but by the way, the real William Shakespeare, that's how he actually spelled his name, Shakespeare, of the from the official theory, right? So he left no books. He left no single book. He left actually the will, and there was the actually six samples of his signature, which was actually shaky, indicating that the guy couldn't really write. So he probably been shown how to spell his name, and he spelled it Shakespeare, but it was, obviously that the guy was struggling to complete even his own signature. And he left no books. He left the mattress. He left the bed. He left the vase, and he left two uneducated illiterate daughters. So how could it be that the greatest literarian of the English literature left his own daughters without being able to read his father works? So it sounds totally unbelievable.
No, I agree with you. I mean, the mainstream theory just doesn't tally. It doesn't add up. And I mean, when you look at those plays, and like you said, it's the greatest works of the English language. How could some English actor, which essentially is a tantamount to a 5th grade education, be producing this? I mean, like you said, I mean, where's this guy's library that you would clearly need to put these works together? I mean, it doesn't exist. Who had access to this at the time? That makes sense. I mean, it's that all fingers point to Sir Francis Bacon and the Order of the Knights of the Helmet. That is the only plausible explanation. Many, historians, they kind of flirt with this. They'll be talking about Shakespeare, and they'll say like, oh, it's clearly not this guy, this, actor from Stratford. It must have been Francis Bacon, but I don't want to talk about that. They kind of, sweep it under the carpet. I mean, when you start breaking down the plays and you see the occult symbolism, the people that are represented in it, John Dee, Giordano Bruno. I mean, it's clearly there is someone highly educated with a lot of worldly experience, with accessing a vast library. I mean, John Dee's library was the envy of Europe. I mean, everything was in that thing. Bacon could have easily have gotten hold of that, or some text from it. I mean, by all means, he is clearly, in my opinion,
They were acquainted anyways.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a historical fact. So, and everybody of this greatest writers and poets such as Marlowe and Oxford and Lord Oxford, they all left the books. They all left some kind of written evidence written by their own hand. The only Shakespeare didn't.
Yeah.
So,
and you get even Edmund Spenser, the author of the Fairy Queen. I mean, that whole thing is overloaded again with occult symbolism. The Fairy Queen is, of course, Queen Elizabeth. And it's broken into 12 parts, 12 houses of the zodiac. It's a soul. It's indicative of the zodiac. You'll find this years later. I mean, these guys know what they're doing. Years later, you'll find Alice in Wonderland. Lewis Carroll, same thing, broken into 12 parts, 12 houses of the zodiac. You have the painting in that story of the trees from white to red. Again, this is an allusion to the Rosicrucians, to John Dee, his fellow mathematician. So yeah, I mean, we've talked about this. I mean, I've been on so many shows. I mean, even in modern day, you look at the works of Ian Fleming, James Bond. Aleister Crowley turns up as Ernst Stavro Blofeld, or Le Chiffre from Casino Royale. Dr. No was Hermann Goring, the Nazi. So yeah, I mean, even in modern times, you'll find authors making allusions to things. So if it's happening today, I mean, can it have happened back then? Yeah, of course. Come on.
What is your opinion? How far-reaching was the influence of the Rosicrucians and Francis Bacon on the destiny of America? Because he probably was the person who designed current United States even before the appearance of the United States as the state.
Right. Well, with Bacon, I mean, clearly you see with the New Atlantis, I mean, it's one of the more salient, utopian texts that clearly is influencing the United States. It's not the only one. The one by Tommaso Campanella, The City of the Sun, that is also highly relevant to the United States. Clearly, with the whole thing with the Rosicrucians is sort of this double-edged sword, because we don't know, to this day, we don't know a whole lot about them. Did they even exist? People in history, big names, went out looking for the Rosicrucians, Rene Descartes, Robert Flood, yet no one seems to be able to found these guys. They put out these tracts, the Rosicrucian manifestos. No one to this day, other than the alchemical wedding of Christian Rosenkreutz, which was put out by a guy named Johann Andre Valentin, no one knows the authorship of the other two. They are highly They are highly influenced by Giordano Bruno and John Dee. I mean, those are clearly the two prominent Rosicrucian thinkers, that kind of aren't Rosicrucian. But then you get into, of course, you get this whole notion of, the Rosicrucians being sort of this Protestant league containing these occult secrets. And when you look at it politically, you clearly see that this is a reaction to the Jesuits and the Counter-Reformation. That the whole thing with the Rosicrucians was sort of to create this sort of Protestant mystical league to stem the Jesuits, was sort of this Catholic mystical league, or cabal. Many historians consider the Rosicrucians, this failed effort, that it didn't really work. The political figures that were supposed to be spearheading this kind of failed. The Winter King and Queen of Bohemia, the 30 Years' War did sort of basically did in the Rosicrucians. And of course, it turns up again years later as the Freemasons. This whole idea of this enlightened universal Protestant brotherhood that sort of runs parallel with the Jesuits, only it's not Roman Catholic, or not associated with the Jesuits, but Jesuit-like, turns up years later with the Freemasons. I mean, in my opinion, you can definitely see a Rosicrucian influence upon the Freemasons. And when you're dealing with the creation of the country, the United States, you are definitely talking about a heavy Masonic influence at that point in time, coming straight from the degrees, the philosophies of Freemasonry. So yeah, I mean, this is what I wrote my first book about. So yeah, I mean, absolutely, when you're dealing with the cultivation of the United States, I mean, I call it the world's first Masonic republic because, I mean, everything in this country, you know, in its founding from start to finish is pretty much Freemasonic. You know, and how much of that comes from Rosicrucianism is debatable. I mean, it's definitely an influence, but there's the one thing with Freemasonry is it paints with very broad strokes. I mean, it incorporates so much, whether it be Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Kabbalah, Kabbalah with the C, Christian Kabbalah, Rosicrucianism, Gnosticism, alchemy. I mean, the mystery religions, so much of it, all of it is incorporated in modern day Freemasonry. And again, this all turns up in the founding of the United States.
Okay, what do you think? Is there a connection between the current organization, which calls itself AMORC in California, San Diego, with the elusive Rosicrucians of 17th century, or is it totally made up structure with no roots whatsoever?
Right. I mean, well, this is the problem with these groups like AMORC and things like that is they claim to be, it has to do with legitimacy. They claim to be the descendants of historical Rosicrucianism, but they just say that. They really can't prove that. And again, if you look at the Rosicrucians just from a historical standpoint, I mean, I'm not talking about like the symbolism or anything like that. You can argue it both ways. I mean, did these guys even exist? I mean, show me a Rosicrucian. I mean, other than maybe one or two guys who sort of flirt with it. I mean, they're hard to find. And like I said, you get the guy, Valentin, who writes the Alchemical Wedding of Christian Rosicrucians. Clearly, when you look at those three manifestos, I mean, you will see the fingerprints of John Dee and Giordano Bruno all over them. Are John Dee and Giordano Bruno Rosicrucians? They would have probably told you no, but clearly their philosophies, their occultism is being manifested in these Rosicrucian tracts. AMORC, it's like today. I mean, if a group wants to call itself the Illuminati, I mean, does that make it so? Probably not. I mean, the Weishaupt cabal, is defunct. Now you can clearly see groups turning up. I mean, even in the United States that are clearly influenced by Weishaupt's cabal, such as like Skull and Bones, and even the Royal Archmasons, the sort of, factions kind of working behind the government. But I mean, are they direct descendants? I mean, that's sort of almost, an opinion more than it is a fact. The AMORC that you asked me about, I mean, they claim descent, but they just claim it. I mean, can they really prove it? I doubt it. I mean, there's nothing. Yeah. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it or anything like that. But it's debatable. I mean, there's no concrete answer to it. Is the problem?
Look, for example, the curious case of the Georgia Guidestones. Yeah, as you know, they fell.
They just were recently destroyed.
Right?
Yeah.
So R.C. Christian. So we have a combination of the Skull and Bones because it was open on 22nd of March. So definitely 322 of Skull and Bones, and lots of other associations. Even if you look from above, from the copter on the structure when it was still standing, it looks like a Skull and Bones and a Skull and Crossbones. Just look at from above on the picture. So you have R.C. Christian, and on the other hand, you have 322 from Skull and Bones. So how do you combine actually Protestant roots of Skull and Bones, which were obviously Protestant? Yeah, we know that Russell went to Germany. He was fascinated by Illuminati. He probably modeled his future society, Skull and Bones, on the Illuminati. But why we see references to the Rosicrucians and the Catholics? So I cannot actually grasp it, because it mind boggles me. How do you combine on one hand a Protestant and a Christian ideology and the Catholic ideology, and also the occult society? So what's your take on this?
Right. Well, I mean, you when you're dealing with Skull and Bones, yeah, I mean, absolutely. The 322 is I mean, it's multi-layered. I mean, I'm with you. I mean, when it's the first thing you think of is skull and bones, but also you have to remember, of course, we're dealing with Hermeticism, as above, so below. March 22nd, the vernal equinox, the resurrection of the sun. Um, the one thing in my opinion, that you always see is when you're dealing with Catholicism, Christianity, and the Abrahamic faiths, is they are in themselves an occult religion. And what I mean by that is all these religions, the Abrahamic faiths, all have occult undertones to them. I mean, whether it be, astrology, Neoplatonism with Christianity, Judaism has Kabbalah, and of course, Islam has Sufism. These are all very occult doctrines. So the stretch from occult to mainstream religion is a very thin one, in my opinion. And again, with Skull and Bones, with the Georgia Guidestones, I mean, there was all sorts of there was alignments with like the vernal equinox with that thing. I mean, I think with the winter solstice. I mean, there was all sort of astrological alignments with that structure. And again, this ties into Hermeticism, as above, so below, the alignment of the heavens with the earth, the drawing down of these supernal, heavenly powers. Again, it wasn't considered satanic or anything. It was just you're drawing down these, heavenly, correspondences, and investing it into this earthly structure. I mean, it was never meant to be diabolical. People think it is, but yeah, I mean, when you're dealing with Protestantism, Catholic, Christianity, Judaism, I mean, within these religions, there's always this occult undercurrents going on. So I don't think the nexus between those are too far off. I mean, a lot of, my experience with it is a lot of, what you call Orthodox Christians or Orthodox Jews. Maybe they don't like it, but it's there nonetheless. I mean, it's unavoidable. Skull and Bones with William Huntington Russell, just to wrap up on that, or get into that. That was a complete reaction. The founding of that at Yale was a total reaction to the anti-Masonic movement of the 1820s. In the 1820s in the United States, in the mid-1820s, 1825, 1826, was the William Morgan affair. And this was when Freemasonry was almost done in by this guy named William Morgan, who wanted to expose the secrets of Freemasonry. He was basically abducted in the middle of the night from his prison cell, dragged over the Canadian line, and never seen from again. Because of that, there was this huge backlash against Freemasonry in the country. It almost went under, but it didn't. But Skull and Bones was a reaction to anti-Masonry. It was founded by Huntington Russell and Alphonso Taft, who was, I think, the great-great-grandfather of William Howard Taft, the former, U.S. president, Supreme Court justice. And it was a complete reaction to the anti-Masonic movement. If you're familiar with, I'm here in Baltimore, Maryland, Edgar Allan Poe. I mean, we talk about encoding things in stories. Poe is another one of these guys. The Cast of Amontillado is an allegory for the anti-Masonry of the 1820s, where Fortunato, the guy in the clown suit, represents Freemasonry, and the other guy, the guy who kills him, of course, Fortunato says, "Aren't you a member of the Brotherhood?" And he says, "No." And then, of course, he winds up doing away with Freemasonry with the own instruments of Freemasonry. Remember, he trials him up, and he's never heard from again. And of course, this is an allusion to William Morgan. So even in Poe, we have these allusions to the occult, Freemasonry, the anti-Masonic movement. So yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. And again, when you're dealing with this, it's like this give and take. It's like this pop culture war going on beneath the history of, beneath the surface of history, with the Freemasons, the Illuminati, anti-Masonry, Christopher Marlowe versus William Shakespeare. It's fascinating.
Exactly. So yeah, definitely Edgar Allan Poe was deep into the occult, and that's why his portrait with a raven is one of the favorite tattoos still among the people which somehow deem themselves as a goth and a gothic culture, and I don't know why they actually picked up this particular imagery. You know that when probably one of the most famous depiction of Edgar Allan Poe, when he's there's a raven depicted over his shoulder, I believe. So because he's written this poem, The Raven. So it still appears lots of times as a tattoo, and yeah, I'm going back. honestly, I read Edgar Allan Poe when I was very young, but I still remember that even now, in the state of mind I am now, I remember that he was mentioning many very interesting occult concepts. Definitely giving up his intimate knowledge with it. So,
well, one of the things I could tell you with Poe was a student at West Point, at the West Point Academy, and one of his teachers was a guy named Ethan Allen Hitchcock. And Ethan Allen Hitchcock, I believe, is the great grandson or great grandson of Ethan Allen, who was one of Washington's generals. He was a Freemason. He was the founder of Vermont. Ethan Allen Hitchcock was an occultist. He actually, believe it or not, you find this hard to believe, he actually held himself out as a Rosicrucian. And while Poe was at West Point, this was one of his mentors, was Ethan Allen Hancock. Hancock, when he left West Point, actually became an advisor, believe it or not, during the Civil War to Abraham Lincoln. And it's often been said that basically that during the American Civil War, Abraham Lincoln's strategy to defeat the South was a product of the Rosicrucians, and it came straight from Ethan Allen Hancock. Very fascinating.
Indeed, very fascinating topic. And what do you think? Is there a Rosicrucian influence right now among the current political class in the United States, or is it completely extinct, or
No,
it has been hijacked?
I believe it's been hijacked. I believe it's a remnant that hasn't gone away, and I would say it's more Freemasonic than it is Rosicrucian. And where it comes from a guy by the name of DeWitt Clinton, who started this. And when he started it, it started out as totally innocuous. And what DeWitt Clinton did was he's a very famous Royal Arch Freemason. He is written out of our history books over here. You'll never hear of him. He's the former mayor of New York City, and he's the former governor of the state of New York, and he's a very prominent Royal Arch Freemason. And he is essentially in the United States the creator of the two-party political system. And what he did was, whether you were a Federalist, whether you were a Federalist, this was the party of John Adams in Washington, or you were a Jeffersonian Republican, this was, of course, the party of Jefferson. This is the party that eventually morphs into the Democratic Party. He worked behind the scenes with other Masons who were part of these political parties to bring people together to get things done. And he created this political machine, and this was working behind the scenes of all government. Clinton thought this was completely benign, but of course, this was one of the main things that Morgan was railing against. This was basically your first form of what you would call the deep state. Was these Royal Arch Masons working behind the government, basically just to work together to get things done in the early days of the country. Morgan was one of the guys trying to expose this deep state, this Masonic deep state. And this, of course, got him killed. Of course, Clinton thought this was totally benign. Clinton dies very young, of course. I think he dies in 1828. He's very young. I believe he's either in his late 40s or early 50s. But of course, this machine, this sort of Frankenstein monster that he created, which was meant to be innocuous, turns into this political machine, which morphs into something called Tammany Hall, which is run by a Freemason and a odd fellow by the name of Boss Tweed. And it's completely corrupt. And it's this political machine that I believe has fallen down to this day, that is basically the modern invention of the deep state that goes all the way back to DeWitt Clinton. And I agree with you. I mean, the word hijacked is probably what it is. It's, you know, it's more, I would say it's more not in the Democrat and the Republican. It's more of the CIA, FBI, black operation, wet work, covert apparatus that owes its origins all the way back to DeWitt Clinton and the Royal Arch Masons, although he'd probably be doing somersaults in his grave, knowing this was sort of what it morphed into. That's at least my opinion of it. I can't offer you hard evidence of this. I mean, when you look at the intelligence organizations in the United States, I mean, you know, a lot of them are all, you know, I mean, the FBI was essentially founded by the Freemasons, J. Edgar Hoover and FDR. The CIA is all skull and bones. And again, it's this sort of, you know, deep state apparatus, you know, this covert black apparatus that goes, you can really trace all the way back to DeWitt Clinton. Although when he was doing it, he was trying to be benign. He intended it to be benign and as a policy solving apparatus, where today it's morphed into this, you know, sort of subversive, covert, you know, part of society. At least that's my opinion on it.
Robert, what do you think? What do you think about the theory, which is actually not a theory, but pretty widely accepted fact that most of the U.S. presidents were descendant of the European royal houses? It's either Irish, English, French, Hungarian, Scottish, or other royal houses. So the Burke peerage traces the origins of all of the U.S. presidents, beside of President Van Buren, and I believe there's one more president which wasn't accounted for. I forgot who it was exactly, which were not traced as the related to one of the European royalties. So it boggles my mind. So even New York Times in an article of 1888 acknowledged that those presidential candidates with the highest amount of royal blood tend to be have more chances to win a presidential race as those with the lesser contents of the royal blood and the veins. So they basically acknowledge that. You can find this article from 1988, and still. If you just examine the list of the passengers, for Mayflower passengers and Arabella passengers, or later pilgrim ships, you see that these guys who came here, they weren't actually very aristocratic, to say the least. For example, this guy John Howland and his future wife Elizabeth Tilley, which actually, as the Mayflower Society states, they are at the foot of the entire mass of the 10 million Americans which are descending from them, right? So this is the passengers of Mayflower, and George Bush, of course, family of George Bush stems also from a Mayflower, and they all tracing their origins either to the French, Irish, or the English royalty. But why weren't they rich and famous? For example, this same John Howland was indentured servant on Mayflower. So how is it actually possible that whole slew of the Boston Brahmins and the entire Harvard establishment stems from these people from a Mayflower, which supposedly weren't wealthy, but having this great heritage, aristocratic heritage, and this kind of boggles my mind.
Yeah, it's not anything I've ever looked into. I had ancestors that came over on the Ark and the Dove, which was an early one. But I've heard that story before of what you're talking about with the high level of royal blood with the presidents. It's not anything, to be brutally honest, I've ever looked into. So I'm going to have to kind of take a pass on it. But I've heard that as well. But I mean, I have no way of accounting for it or anything like that. I mean, it is interesting. Like I said, I've heard about this, but it's not anything that I've ever really researched or looked into.
I just thought it would look plausible if a bunch of the descendants of the royals would come on one of the first pilgrim ships, and actually they gave the beginning of the new establishment. It would be logical, but these guys weren't wealthy at all. Yeah, so but how did they trace their origin? That's a big question.
Well, it's funny because it's like the American Civil War was like almost a retelling of the English Civil War, where the North was all the Puritans. The northern colonies were all founded by the Dutch, the Puritans, the Oliver Cromwellites. The southern states were all founded by the royals. It was all the English aristocracy. And when you look at the American Civil War, I mean, it was basically the Puritans versus the royals, and it was the same outcome, where the Puritans won. In the English Civil War, Oliver Cromwell defeated Charles I. In the American Civil War, I mean, it was the same sort of thing. The Puritans of the North defeated the Royalists in the South. I mean, it is weird to think of it like that, but I mean, that is true what happened. And like I said, I've heard that story for years about the bloodlines and going back, and I don't dispute it. But unfortunately, it's just one of those things I've just never gotten around to looking into.
Yeah, it looks. I've heard the story many times, but I've studied it pretty well. Burke Peerage, which is one of the most respectful edition of the genealogy studies, which goes, I believe, over 200 years. They publish every year the articles on the new American presidents and the other, let's say, celebrities, and actually they publish their lineage and heritage, and I believe this kind of organization is beyond this dispute, because they're doing a serious work since 200 years. So there's no reason not to believe them. I don't trust New York Times, but even if New York Times admits it, I believe why would they put it actually out on the public, this fact, just to annoy the public, that someone with a most quantity of the royal blood would win the election. So what does it mean? Does it mean that the election would be rigged?
Yeah, I don't know.
The obvious conclusion.
Yeah, it's strange, because the one thing I'll say is that I've looked into is with Donald Trump, why is there just such this strong negative reaction to him? I mean, and if you look at him, what's Trump trying to do? I mean, he's trying to dismantle this deep state covert apparatus. What other president was trying to do the same thing? And I'm not comparing the two, but John F. Kennedy was trying to do the same thing. John F. Kennedy was, I mean, what was his famous line? I'm going to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces. And Trump was trying to do the same thing. What's strange about this is Kennedy, both John F. Kennedy and Trump are Gemini, and Gemini, Gemini is ruled by the planet Mercury.
Exactly.
And what's Mercury? Well, Mercury is the destroyer. I mean, this is what I talk about in my book. It's an archetype. Mercury is the destroying agent. It annihilates everything in its wake. And that's why you had this super strong negative reaction to people like John F. Kennedy, and Trump. It's their destroyers. I mean, whether they know it or not, they're a destroying agent. And that's why there is this. They're living, breathing archetypes, and they signify Mercury. Which, if you're familiar with any, if you have a baseline knowledge of alchemy, you know that Mercury is present. Quicksilver is present in all the alchemical processes, and what does it do? It breaks it down. It destroys. That's all it knows how to do. It's just a destroying agent, and that's what Donald Trump is, and that's what JFK was. And when you understand that, then you begin to understand why there's this massive reaction to them, quite negatively.
Yeah, and by the way, the little town which was built by the Manhattan Project near the Trinity test site was called Mercury. So not for nothing, of course, because it was a site of destruction. So definitely, and
absolutely,
somehow those who were in control of the narrative put out the name of Pierre and Maria Curie, because if you just call Maria Curie very fast, you get Mercury.
Mercury.
And they and they invented the radium, so which has the atomic number of 88, the radium. And what is suspicious, the death of Pierre Curie. He was claimed to be crashed by the wheel of the cart wagon on the crossroads. But if you look, how looks the sign of the alchemical sign of the Mercury? This is exactly what it is. So it's a head crashed by the wheel on a crossroads, because that's actually the sign of Mercury. So it looks to me that somehow put out the narrative for the death of Pierre Curie. I don't dispute he was probably prolific scientist, same as his wife, but somehow I find this kind of coincidences too suspicious. That he was crossing the just a normal pedestrian crosswalk on a I believe it was a Dauphin Street in Paris, and then he fell, and his head was crushed by the cart wagon, and someone in the crowd, as the newspaper Humanité states, proclaimed, "Way, this is the famous Dr. Curie, the inventor of the radio." So how would anyone recognize someone with who had just his head crashed on a pavement as the Professor Curie? It's just totally mind-boggling to me.
Yeah.
Looks like a cult code to me.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it. I mean, the one thing that I'm doing Cinema Symbolism for right now, I think we talked about this the last time that, I was talking to you, was it is, it is, in my opinion, like hard to cipher out or divide out, what is like intentional, because you get this stuff that just doesn't add up. And the one thing that is good, at least in my research, is you do have the works of Carl Jung, where you get into synchronicity, things like that, where it's like a supernatural explanation. It's just a supernatural happening. And again, I know we talked about this, with, and we don't have to get into it, but again, with like all the symbolism with 9/11 leading up to the main event. I mean, even going back years, it's quite uncanny and it's quite startling. And you can look at it a couple ways. I mean, you can look at it whether it's intentional or not, but you can also look at it if it's a supernatural event. And both are equally fascinating. So, as you mentioned at the beginning, that's one of the things I'm working on in Cinema Symbolism 4, and coming along very nicely.
Excellent, Robert. I think it was a terrific conversation. So let's do it again, because there are lots of topics remain uncovered. But I think the Shakespeare been well covered, even though it's too vast of the topic. I mean, we could probably go on for days talking about the impact of Baconians and Shakespearean works on the destiny of America and other countries.
No, I agree with you. It's a deep subject. It's like, Kabbalah, the influence of Kabbalah, Shakespeare. Yeah, I mean, movies, Freemasonry. Yeah, I mean, we could sit and talk about this for days on end.
Okay, excellent. So let's do it again. And I would probably I would be editing this video for a longer period of time, because I have to get back in shape first. And for the past 2 weeks that I didn't appear online, I have a long queue of the video material which I have to edit. So expect it to be out somewhere within 3 weeks, probably.
That's not bad.
I'll do my best. I'll do my best. At least I have now a stable internet.
No, that's good. And is this going to go on DNA, or are you going to put it out, or?
I will put it out everywhere.
Okay. Okay, great.
Excellent.
Okay.
Okay, let's stay in touch.
Yes.
And thank you again for this interview, Robert.
Thank you, Vadim. I'll see you soon.
See you soon. Bye-bye.